Lep pozdrav želim vsem skupaj. Pa v studiu. Lep pozdrav želim vsem skupaj. Upam, da smo rešili vse tehnične težave in nastopamo v živo. Pred vami je začetek simpozija v okviru letošnjega Borštnikovega srečanja. Moram reči, da moram kar prebrati naslov: Senzorialno gledališču na sledi, vonjav, vsakdanjem življenju, onkraj, njega. Pred vami smo praktično cel uredniški oziroma organizacijski odbor konference. Pri meni je najprej Mojca Jan Zoran, ki bo povedala nekaj besed kot direktorica Slogija oziroma Slovenskega gledališkega inštituta.
Lepo pozdravljeni tako vi v dvorani, kot tudi vsi na virtualni resničnosti. Pozdravljam vas v imenu Slovenskega gledališkega inštituta in vam želim eno lepo, interesantno in pa seveda plodno senzorialno izkušnjo v teh 2 dneh.
Ja, ker živimo v teh čudnih časih, nas je večina seveda tukaj pod maskami. Pač takšna je tale zadeva. Za nami je seveda tudi Aleš Novak, direktor Borštnikovega srečanja.
Dober dan, lep pozdrav vsem. Na Borštnikovem srečanju smo veseli tega dogodka, ki povezuje nekatere pomembne institucije v Republiki Sloveniji. Senzorialno gledališče je pojav, ki je vreden dodatne pozornosti in raziskav. Pomembno je zaznamoval tudi drugo polovico 90-ih let v Sloveniji. Tudi sam sem takrat bil eden od gledalcev, ki je imel to priložnost, da sem neposredno izkušnjo čutnega gledališča, takrat s predstavo Enrika Vargasa, Orakelj je tako Tomaž, ki je bila v Sloveniji na Tomaževo povabilo takrat. Tudi letos smo v razširjeni varianti tega simpozija želeli povabiti predstavo Enrika Vargasa, ampak nam je to preprečila spomladanska epidemija takrat. Jaz sem bil že skoraj na poti v Barcelono, kjer bi ti pogovori o gostovanju stekli. Do tega takrat ni prišlo, pa če bi takrat uspeli, pa nam morda zdaj ne bi več uspelo, ker se v zadnjih dnevih tudi dviguje število okuženih. Tako da sem vesel, da se posvečamo refleksiji in raziskavam tega področja. Vsem partnerjem pri tem projektu bi se seveda zahvalil za odlično sodelovanje, ki nas je privedlo do tega, da smo danes tukaj z vami. Upamo, da ta spletna različica dobro poteka in da bodo lahko ljudje doma lepo in brez težav spremljali potek današnjega in jutrišnjega dela simpozija. Hvala lepa vsem in se gledamo.
Hvala. Verjetno pa moram reči, da glavno pobudo za današnji simpozij je dala pa Barbara Pija-Jenič, pionirka senzorialnega gledališča pri nas, tako da bom vesel še nekaj pozdravnih besed.
Hvala. Jaz tudi pozdravljam vse. Hvala, da boste spremljali ta simpozij. Mislim, da je prvi tak v svetu na tej ravni. In sem zelo hvaležna vsem soorganizatorjem, da so tudi sami videli en pomemben doprinos k gledališki umetnosti. Tako da upam, da bodo tudi vsi ostali po svetu senzorialci pridruženi in spremljali simpozij tudi po internetu. Hvala.
Hvala. Tudi jaz upam, da bo ta hibridna varianta simpozija, kot zdaj temu rečemo, uspela. Ni nobenega dvoma pravzaprav v to, da nam vsaj naši kolegi, ki skrbijo za tehniko, to omogočajo. Med organizatorji simpozija, tega še nisem povedal na začetku, je pa sedaj trenutek, poleg festivala Borštnikovo srečanje Slovenskega gledališkega inštituta Zavoda Senzorium, nastopata tudi oddelek za dramaturgijo in uprizoritvene študije in pa raziskovalna skupina Akademije za gledališče, radio, film in televizija AGRFT Univerze v Ljubljani ter oddelek za etnologijo in kulturno antropologijo prav tako Univerze v Ljubljani. Tomaža Toporišiča, ki je prav tako eden od tega, če mu rečemo spiritus movens, tega simpozija, pa prosim, da nastopi v dveh vlogah, skratka, kot član organizacijskega odbora, eden od pobudnikov simpozija in pa seveda tudi kot predstavnika AGRFT-ja.
Hvala lepa. Pred nekaj minutami sem imel privilegij, da sem spregovoril po dolgem času, skoraj da v živo znotraj tega simpozija z gospodom Enriquem Vargasom, ki mi je rekel, upam, da se kmalu vidimo, in jaz tudi seveda upam, da ga bomo kmalu lahko videli z njegovim gledališčem v boljših zdravstvenih okoliščinah, tudi v Mariboru. Mislim, da bi bil to zelo lep dogodek. Bo pa ta naš simpozij seveda v veliki meri posvečen seveda njegovemu izjemnemu delu in pa temu, kar je v bistvu zasajal v slovenskem gledališkem prostoru. Barbara Pija v bistvu sem dobro spoznal ravno kot akterko te Vargasove predstave, o kateri je prej govoril Aleš. In seveda je na nek način, oziroma na kar zelo živ način zanesla njegovo idejo senzorialnega gledališča v slovenski prostor in vzpostavila senzorialno gledališče kot pomemben segment slovenskega gledališča. Zelo sem vesel, da nam je uspelo sestaviti ta simpozij. V imenu dekana Akademije za gledališče, gospoda Tomaža Gubenška, vas pozdravljam seveda vse kot prodekan akademije in v imenu akademije seveda moram izraziti naše veliko zadovoljstvo, da smo lahko v tako zanimivi in po mojem mnenju zelo konstruktivni in družbi sestavili ta simpozij in da smo lahko eden partnerjev tega simpozija.
Najlepša hvala. Zdaj pa na koncu še čisto zadnje dejanje našega uvoda. Moram pa pojasniti seveda še to, da simpozij je mednarodni in bo potekal v angleškem jeziku, tako da bomo potem, ko končamo s te uradno napovedjo simpozija, seveda preskočili in neverjetno bo še deloma španščina na začetku. Skratka, jaz pa pozdravljam oziroma najavljam pozdravni nagovor dekana Filozofske fakultete Romana Kuharja, ki se žal fizično ne more udeležiti te naše uvodne slovesnosti, je pa pripravil kratek filmček, jaz upam, da je že pripravljen za projekcijo. Jaz se zahvaljujem vsem, ki ste tukaj in vsem, ki ste predstavili oziroma uvedli ta simpozij. Upam, da se bomo vsi imeli dobro v naslednjem, torej današnjem popoldnevu in jutri čez cel dan.
Spoštovane udeleženke, spoštovani udeleženci mednarodnega simpozija Senzorialno v gledališču, sledi, vonjav, vsakdanjem, življenju in onkraj njega, lepo vas pozdravljam v imenu Filozofske fakultete Univerze v Ljubljani in se hkrati opravičujem, ker danes ne morem biti z vami v fizični obliki. No, pravzaprav odsotnost fizičnega vse bolj postaja naša nova normalnost, sploh v izobraževalnih institucijah, zato sem toliko bolj vesel, da Filozofska fakulteta sodeluje pri projektu, ki poudarke daje prav na fizični izkušnji gledališča, na naših čutih, našem vonju. Zdi se namreč, da smo morda prehitro in nekritično zaobjeli možnost virtualnega sveta in predvsem v našem primeru virtualnega izobraževanja. Filozofska fakulteta se je zato letos poleti jasno postavila v zagovor fizični akademski skupnosti, predavanjem v predavalnicah in proti temu, da nekritično postajamo spletna Zoom univerza. Verjetno smo vsi v zadnjih nekaj mesecih doumeli, kako pomembna je digitalizacija naše kulture in našega vsakdanjega življenja, sploh v času epidemije, kot je COVID-19. Verjetno pa hkrati še nekoliko bolj cenimo senzorialno izkušnjo fizičnega sveta. Nobenega dvoma ni, da je digitalizacija humanistike naša prihodnost. vendar moramo vedno znova vztrajati tudi pri tem, da digitalno ne nadomesti fizičnega. Lahko ga nadgradi, lahko ga dopolni, ne more pa ga zamenjati. Spletna predavanja preprosto niso isto kot predavanje v predavalnicah. Ogled gledališke predstave na YouTube preprosto ni isto kot izkušnja gledališča in katarze, ki jo ponuja v fizičnem prostoru dvorane, v neposrednem stiku s sočlovekom in materialno kulturo. Ampak v dani situaciji je seveda potrebno upoštevati tudi druge dimenzije, vključno zdravjem. Tisti, ki boste simpozij spremljali nadaljavo, vam želim hitro internetno povezavo, čisto sliko in dober zvok, skratka vse tisto, kar v realnem svetu razumemo za samoumevno, vsem preostalim pa želim uspešen simpozij in užitek v vonju, ki ga virtualni svet preprosto ne pozna. Srečno in vse dobro.
Gledališče, v katerem se nahaja Senzorialno gledališče. Zdaj bomo nadaljeval v angleščini, da nas bo razumel naš gost. Nažalost ne znam špansko, drugače bi v španščini, pa potem bi itak nastali problemi z prevajanjem. Rad bi pozdravil na drugi strani gospoda Enrikeja Vargasa, velikega režiserja sodobnega gledališča, kolumbijskega dramaturga in antropologa. I would like to welcome Enrique Vargas, Colombian dramaturg and anthropologist, one of the leading figures of contemporary theater and, let us say, the inventor of the Teatro de los Sentidos. Welcome, Enrique. We are very glad to have you with us in Maribor, unfortunately only through the Zoom, but we are looking really forward to be able to welcome you in Maribor and in Slovenia among us again in the nearest future. Do you hear us okay?
Yeah. Not very good. The connection is really failing.
Okay, we hear you very well. So anyway, nobody is very much interested in what I'm going to say. So I would like you to ask you to begin and give us your introductory thoughts about the Teatro de los Sentidos and about the theater, your theater, and about the theater of today in a very special situation.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. Good to hear you. It's been a long time since we saw each other. Listen, first of all, I like to say that my worst enemies are words. I'd like you to, as we go on in this conversation, try not to listen to my words. Try to center only in the silences in between the words. Usually words, I use words to hide, to escape, to confuse. But perhaps our conversation will be more clear if we center in the silences, in between the words. In a normal conversation, we don't pay much attention to words, we pay attention to silences. But I don't know if you're listening to me now. Am I coming through? Is it clear?
Can you hear?
Yes, we hear it very well. I would like to welcome also, I hear a voice now, Gabriel Hernandez, the assistant of Enrique Vargas, whom we met in I think in Caracas already. And then, of course, Gabriel was also here in Ljubljana for the Oraculos. Yes, we hear you very well. Enrique, please, you can continue.
Okay, I just wanted to say that it'd be good if we try to do the conversation putting more attention in the silences than in the words. That's the main thing. Also, I like to be interrupted as much as possible, so you have a dialogue. So I'm very open to questions. I don't see the questions as interruptions, but as a dialogue. I would like to talk about Senzorial languages in two ways. First, I like to share with you how the experience, how I grew the experience. Because it all began in a farm. I was a child in the mountains, in the Andean mountains, and in a coffee plantation. And I was alone in this farm, very, very lonely. And the only way I could attract children to come to see me from the town, was if I could create games for them. The games I created in the farm were, it was a coffee farm. If you go into a coffee plant, into a coffee tree, the coffee tree is like a little house. You go inside the coffee tree, and the walls could be open, and then you have another coffee tree next to it. And I would make hiding places in the coffee plantation. And when my mother would send my brother to ask for me, I would go to the walls of connecting the plantation, and I would make a labyrinth. I would make a labyrinth to hide and to escape from my brother. And also I would make labyrinths with the coffee trees to go into hidden places. I was trying to find places that I could not know, I was not allowed to visit, but making a labyrinth with the trees, I could go anywhere. So I used the coffee plantation, the coffee plants, to hide, to play games, to escape from my brother, and mostly to do hidden, to do forbidden games. When I grew up and I went to theater school later in my life, I would ask the teachers, listen, I want to do theater which is not European theater. I like to go to my roots, to the things I grew up with. And they say, oh, be serious, Enrique, that's not theater. You should you should go into art school, into okay, shall we continue?
Yeah.
So
It was a shortcut, but it's okay. Please do continue.
okay. So in the theater school, I was a dissident, sort of, and I wanted to continue doing games to develop the improvisations of the work we had to do. And our approach to the work was, first we would have a question, then we developed the question into a game, and then we put the game, in my case, I put the game in the labyrinth form. If I could make a game out of my question, then I had a good road ahead, then it would work. But the main thing for us was to find
I think we lost you. Enrique, can the technique see what is going on?
was based on a contradiction. It was based on a contradiction that had a beginning, had a center, and had an end. And the contradiction for the game was, first, we created silence. Silence was the main thing. Then from silence, we tried to develop curiosity. And once the curiosity was developed, then out of curiosity, we create a question in the mind of the traveler that was going to the labyrinth. And once they began to walk, then the tension was beginning to develop. the question would come to a central point where the two opposite forces of the contradiction would encounter. There'll be, I'm talking about the tensions that we create in the labyrinth. Our public would go into this contradiction, walking in certain directions, but then the contradiction will be tense by an opposite force. We have two opposite forces. And there will be a tension that moved by curiosity. We worked a lot on what we call poetics of curiosity. If the curiosity was strong enough, our public would continue. If the fear was stronger than the curiosity, the public would stop. But then the tension between fear and curiosity was very important for us, extremely important. And in that way, we developed our dynamic. And then we did not use words. We used smells and skin. We like to say that our soul is on the skin. And you almost sleep. It was dark, the silences were in the darkness. The language of the labyrinth was usually dark. We could not see anything. And this is not to say that words became enemies. And the more words we use, the
I want to prekindati. Prosim?
Sorry, I take the opportunity to see if I'm talking too fast. If anybody has any questions,
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Enrique. You're talking very nicely, but we just had some small technical problems, but I don't think the problems were very big. I can ask if, but I maybe we would like you to continue. Sorry?
Is there audience over there?
Yeah. It's a small audience of 10 people or something like that because we have restrictions, but there is a lot of people which is following it through YouTube, mostly most of the people, and there are students also of anthropology, professor of anthropology. So because I know that your work concentrated very much also on the anthropology. I also once met with you and your students. You invited me to the university in Bogota, where you basically worked with the students of anthropology. So in this way, we joined in this symposium the theater sciences, so to say, with anthropology in order to try to approach the sensorial and the smell in theater and in everyday life, but basically starting up from your concept of the theater of the senses. So maybe for the moment we would like you to continue with your thoughts, and then we would like to ask you some questions. I think also I would maybe invite now if Barbara can come to sit with me here, because we are the close collaborators of you, and so I think me and her will ask you some questions, and also the public later on. Please, Barbara. Please continue, Enrique.
Thanks a lot. Barbara, from the family, Barbara was integrating the work of Teatro de los Sentidos as a very good actress. I'm upset that you stole Barbara from us, because we wanted to keep her with us in Madrid. Okay, if Thomas, if you had any questions and you'd like to interrupt, or anybody had anything to ask, I'd like to enter into a dialogue.
Yeah, Enrique,
yeah.
yeah, well, you began the first sentence you said, it was, please don't listen to my words, listen to my silences. I know you are thinking about these contradictions for a long time now, so maybe you can talk about this a little bit more, because now we are in a very loud world full of images and words. So to talk about silence maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I want to say that what I was trying to do when I was a child, I was trying to gain consciousness. In fact, I think we do labyrinth, we do art to create consciousness, to be conscious of something. And this farm it was in an Andean forest, which was a dangerous place. And I had to gain consciousness of the territory. I had to gain consciousness, going to places that were forbidden for me, that I could not see. And as I continued doing plays and working, I felt that what I was trying to do was using the theater to gain consciousness, to find out where I was coming from and what I was going into. Of course, I was not doing this consciously, because otherwise it would become propaganda, and it was not that, it was just a game, but a game to create consciousness. A labyrinth, as a form, is a symbol. You know where you come in, but you're not sure how you're going to come out. A labyrinth is we define a symbol as a stimulus. One symbol is a stimulus, which makes you go from one place to another place. And a stimulus that lets you go into something that you know, and lets you go out into in an unexpected form. Labyrinth in itself, just by the way it is a symbol that you could go through. And when you meet a person, when you meet another person, a friend, whoever it is, you should know that you're about to enter a labyrinth. You should see your best friend as a labyrinth in itself. And she or he, he's talking with you, and he is enabling you to go into a dialogue. You are going into both labyrinths at your own risk. And no preset blueprints. You take a risk. And in general, by using labyrinths as a model to talk or to play or to develop, we create consciousness. In Chile, before, after Allende was socialist president, and when Allende was in power, labyrinths are very important in schools. Also, the schools, as people sat to talk, they sat in circles. The circle is important also, the ellipses. But when Pinochet came and Allende was killed, labyrinths were not allowed. And the way people sat in the meeting places, in the schools, were no more circular patterns, but one after the other. And all changed. I was continuing doing theater, and at the time we had three figures. For us, it was I'm talking about 1960 or so. Stanislavski was very important for us. There was a lot of discussions about what was important in the early Stanislavski or the late Stanislavski. Then later on, Grotowski and Barba. And it became like a Vatican. Vatican, you say? Yeah. And we found that the theater world was so conservative, so stiff, so we didn't find people eager to talk about their contradictions and their difficulties and the shapes they used to work. But there were sects. The Grotowskian sect opposing to the Barba sect, they were always sectarian. And yes, and I wonder why they took themselves so seriously. Why couldn't they laugh at themselves? We should suspect of somebody that's not able to laugh at himself. If you take yourself too seriously, that's suspicious. And the Theatre Vatican was too fragile, and that's why we went back to the Indian communities. We worked with children, with tribal ceremonies, with games, and most of all to develop forms of extension and creating consciousness. Which is important was not so much how we did it, but why we were doing it. Nietzsche used to say that if you have a porqué, if you have a why, then the how comes naturally. But the why is very important, the how to develop. So we didn't do consciously sensorial theater, but we played games with whatever we had in mind, and most of the time, being distrustful of words. Also because I don't speak so many Indian languages, and anyway, I find it more natural to talk that way.
If I
I
can
don't know
ask you,
so far if we should stop a moment to see if there are any comments or questions from here on.
I will just have
Any
one
curiosity.
question, and then we would pass to the others.
So,
Are you there?
Yes. Do you hear me? Us?
please,
Yeah. Yeah. Do you hear us?
yeah.
Yeah. I just have one question. I liked the when you talked about Grotowski, Barba, and the others. I liked your sentence that we should also take care and concentrate a lot on a laugh, on a playfulness of the theater. You explore this playfulness of the theater very much. Could you maybe tell us a bit about this, the other side of the theater, not just the seriousness, but the play, the playfulness, which takes us to the history, and theater, the Teatro de los Sentidos takes a lot of that.
In the Middle Ages, people used to say that men think and the gods laugh. The main thing we have from gods is laughter. They laugh at us, and we have these deep thoughts, which are ridiculous most of the time. I feel that we develop through laughter.
Creo que se cortó. Hello.
Do you hear me?
We hear you very well. Yeah. We don't have about the laughter, which we like a lot.
I lost communication. Okay. It's in the Indian communities. It's easier to work with humor, whereas in the main cities in Colombia at the time, laughter was suspicious. The more rigid the regime was, the more difficult it was to laugh. So that's the way we did. And as I was saying, if we have, si tenemos un por qué, if we have a why, then the how develops. And that's, we found that sharing a dialogue was not something we should think as something worthy of intellectual. The main thing was the emphasis in Teatro de los Sentidos for all this work in the Indian communities, or in the work we did, was listening. We feel that if we talk with someone, we should talk to listen. If the public comes to our place, our play, our structure, the labyrinth, whatever we're doing, should be used to listen to them. Also, we don't like the idea of people coming to listen to us. I think that's very wrong. That's very boring. The idea is not to prepare for people to listen to us, but for us to prepare to listen to the people. People that come into a performance with us should feel that our purpose is to listen to them. And if we're not listening, the work doesn't work at all. Of course, there's a secret, but the secret is in the other that I come into. If I go to the other, I go to listen, and in that way we can hear each other. Then that we do by playing. So the main aspect of our development, as you were saying, Thomas, is playing. Doing a playful situation. The stronger the game is, the more ancient and the more naive and the more wise the work. But the wisdom comes from playing, from not taking yourself seriously, from forgetting about fixed structures. And just now, for instance, there is a lot of difficulty here in Barcelona to develop theater. You cannot. It's hard to have so many people in the theater to go out into the street and to develop normal theater situations. So we're doing something. We're doing an experiment in a neighborhood called Gracia. We decided we're making Gracia into a board game. And the people are the figures that move in the game. We're creating a
We lost you for a moment. I hope that we're going to get you back. In the meantime,
la comunicación.
It's okay. Enrique and Gabriel, we hear you now. Yeah, maybe would there be, if there would be, we still have some 5 or 10 minutes. Are there maybe any questions? Would you like to comment something, Rajko, from what was said? Our colleague Rajko Muršić, I'm asking, not for the moment, or yes? No? Okay. I liked your, maybe I'll just ask you something more. I liked your sentence, the secret is in the other. So I think this could be one of the crucial points of Teatro de los Sentidos, how to invite the other, which is of course the spectator, the audience, to share the secret with the actors. This is something which it's a ritual which is an everyday ritual, but which is very theatrical and which is very sublime in a way. Could you maybe just as the last of your thoughts for today, comment on this secret is in the other?
The secret has to do with complicity. If we understand that the theater situation is a game, and a game could only develop if there is complicity. And as complicity develops, you find that the extreme complicity is a game, is a secret. The secret means there's a complicity to keep the secret, and to develop strength and curiosity out of the secret. But to listen to a secret, you cannot invade others to listen to a secret. You should let the others come. Let the others share the silence with the others, and let the secret be the moving force. If there's no secret, there's no complicity. And if there's no complicity, we cannot develop anything. I feel that the main thing with the secret is not for us not to get to know it. The moment I understand my secret, I'm dead. But I know I need it. But I cannot examine it like if I was a medical surgeon, a doctor, opening the body. The secret enables us to talk, to knock on the door of consciousness. And the main objective in the work is to develop consciousness. And there's a contradiction between information and experience. If the work is information, then it's boring. There's no tension, there's no secret. But if the work has two opposite tensions, one stronger tension that makes the development and another tension which opposes, then there's a point where the two tensions get closer and closer to each other, and you cannot. You have to change. The tension changes you, and that's the body. It's not the words, it's the body. A sensorial situation is not necessarily using the five senses or the six senses. So there's only one sense, not five. There's only one sense. Only that you could use it to open windows into all the situations, but there's only one sense with many windows. And the less clear it is, the better. A while ago in Kashima, in Italy, we did a play which was about 1 kilometer away from the public. People had to, the play was done in the mountain, and we were in a small valley, very far away. And the work of the actors was to develop a situation that I could hardly see, because they had to give us a dramatic situation so that it was so far away that we had to imagine. And the less clear it was, the more difficult it was to see, the stronger it became. We found, and it was very sensorial. And it was the same with sound. Sometimes people feel that sound has to be very present. You have to have the sound so close that you could hear it so close, and that killed the space. We found that the farther away the sound was, the richer would be the situation. So we were looking for a sound, for a homeopathical approach to sound, or to image. So we could not see clearly. So the less we saw it, the less we see, the more difficult it was to get to it. The interpreting was we felt that in Gracia, in the barrio, in the hood, and here where we work now, people were used to overacting. Everything was overacted. And people were conditioned by overacting. But once we find that absence was, the more absent we were, the stronger and the more sincere we got. Then we found that instead of putting to approach more for sound, but to see more clearly for image, definitely we did the work. When we protected ourselves from overacting and overseeing, being atacado by so many perverted senses. So with this situation of the virus, by making the Nebuto Gracia into a big board game and the public into players in this big game, we were learning a lot because of the definition. This is what the theory is about was wrong for us. Definitions are limiting. We like to see sensoriality as a question. As a question to develop consciousness. And,
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. This is. I would maybe we could finish with this sentence about the theater as a means of developing consciousness, a specific consciousness. We will have to proceed with the symposium, and I would like to thank Enrique for your very, very inspiring words. I would also like Gabriel to be with you, and I would like you to invite you and also Gabriel for if you. Yes.
Gabriel.
He's here. Yeah. Hi,
Hidden
Gabriel.
here.
Yeah, I know that you're hidden, but you're present in a very important way. Also, I would like to take this occasion to thank you really very, very much for these very inspiring words, Enrique, which we're going to because we have this streaming, we can listen to them once, twice, and also listen to the silences between your words. And I would like, and they will get us. They will get us to a different understanding of the theater, which your theater and your thoughts always got me to, and also my colleagues in Ljubljana, and we could say that the oracles in Ljubljana change our perception of the theater. That after oracles, our perception was really changed, not for just one generation, but for a lot of generation. And hopefully we're going to be able to do this in the future with our colleagues from the Borshnik Festival, also in Maribor. And I would like to thank you once more in the name of the organizing committee, in the name of the public here and on the online. We are already getting some very good responses from your introductory lecture. And I would like to invite you to join us, if you'll be able, either you or Gabriel, for the final session tomorrow afternoon, and maybe we will be at that time able to get some more insights from you. Thank you very much. Also, in the name of Barbara, I'll pass you Barbara anyway.
Say, Gabriel.
Thank
yes.
you, Tomas. Yes, we are very happy to be part of the work. Just not forgetting that, as Enrique is saying, we must read the best on the silence and the things we don't hear or we don't see. Just to leave this sentence as Enrique is saying now. Thank you so much for your invitation.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thank
Gracias,
you.
Barbara. Gracias.
Tomorrow, Tomasz wanted to say about discussion, that we have also half an hour of discussion. The final discussion, yeah.
At what time is it?
The final
Yeah.
It's at tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, from 4 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So we would be glad if you could join us, and muchas gracias for all that you did for us and you did for today.
We will
Thank
be
you.
there tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry we couldn't manage to have the workshop, because that would be another option to do
Yeah.
such a thing.
Yeah.
But next time.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I wish you a nice afternoon, and we're going to have a short break of 5 minutes, and then we're going to proceed with our program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are continuing our first session of our symposium, and I'm very glad to have an opportunity to introduce David House, one of the founders in anthropology of sensory studies in general, not only anthropologically speaking. David House comes from Montreal, from Concordia University, and he is currently directing the project called Explorations in Sensory Design, and he is at the same time interested in law studies and the law and the regulation of sensation is another project he is leading at the moment, and his really many publications include ways of sensing, understanding the senses in a society, and for example, senses and sensation, which is 4 volumes, substantial volumes, the ground of sensory studies and sensory anthropology, critical and primary study sources. And with Constant Classen, he is the author of Aroma, the cultural history of smell, which is definitely the most relevant issue for our symposium here in Maribor. So I hope David is already with us, and I am just announcing his presentation entitled Nosewise, Scenting Anthropological Knowledge Production and Communication.
Thank you ever so much, Raiko, for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here virtually in Maribor at this very momentous event. And it's momentous, I think, because what we are seeking to do, following the lead, following the inspiration of Barbara Piagenik, is to theorize smell in performance, to think about the theatricality of scent. Now, this is a very radical move, because if you go back in the history of theater, you find, at least in its Greek origins, that theater is dedicated to sight. Theater comes from a word meaning to see, to look upon. And so what we encounter is the theater as a place to go and see. Now, there are other traditions out there, like in India, for example, where people go to savor the emotions that are presented by the actors. This is given in the term rasa, which means both savor and emotion. And so, in the case of India, you go to taste a performance instead of to see it. Now, what about the idea of smelling a performance? This is a novel departure. It's one that Barbara has been cultivating for many years. And so here we meet, not as visionaries, but as, I'm not sure what the best word is to use. What's the opposite of visionary? Smelly or sniffers? None of those have quite the same positive connotation, and we have to do something about that. But I must say it's delightful to be here in the company of Raiko, of Helmi, of Caro, and of Barbara, people who are like-minded, people who are nose-wise, if I can invoke the title of my presentation. So I'd like to divide this presentation into 2 parts. First of all, I'd like to talk about some of the work of the Center for Sensory Studies here at Concordia in Montreal, and specifically a project led by Chris Salter from Design Art, which is called Sensory Entanglements. And then in the second part, I'd like to talk about the creation of a scent. This is a project that I was involved in recently with a perfumer from International Flavor and Fragrances, and also the Dutch design studio Polymorph. And so I'd like to talk about that as both examples of the implication of smell in theatrical experience. So to begin with the Sensory Entanglements project, Chris describes our team, which consists of Indigenous and non-Indigenous scholars and also artists from Canada and Australia, as follows. He says the team is attempting to explore the productive tension in how the newness of emerging technologies, despite their colonial origins and structures, might enable an indigenizing of sensorial artistic experiences that disrupts historical boundaries, challenges entrenched borders, creates potential forms of culturally specific empathy, and potentially may decolonize the representation of otherness. So, by way of one of the examples of the numerous environments that we have created, or that members of the team have created over the years, I'd like to describe briefly an installation called Akasquan Mikiwa, which is by Cheryl Lirondelle. And Cheryl is one of the original members of the Sensory Entanglements team, and she is also an artist of Irish, Canadian, and Cree ancestry. And actually, if you'd like to start the video now, I will talk over it. It's a video, a 1-minute video of this work of art. And what you'll notice about it is that, unlike conventional works of art, which consist of objects, what this it consists of is rather an immersive experience. And so for this work, Cheryl and Joseph Netauhau, who is a Cree elder from Saskatchewan, gathered sage from the prairies and made it into bundles. And then they invited people from Toronto, because the actual version that I'm talking about in the video is one that took place in Toronto. They invited people to a park on the outskirts of Toronto, and there, with the Toronto skyline appearing in the background, they distributed the sage bundles, which people held in one hand and lit. And they also held flashlights in the other hand. And they were invited to form a circle. And here, as you can see, they used the flashlights in such a way as to form the shape of the poles of the teepee. So the canvas for this light sculpture was the smoke of the sage bundles, which pervaded the atmosphere with a very distinctive aroma. And in addition to the light beams of the flashlights, which were the poles of the teepee, you have people being positioned in a particular way. So these are members of the dominant society of the Toronto community, and included in the particular instance I'm analyzing was the mayor of Toronto, who took up positions and formed an indigenous architectural structure, that is a teepee. And in this way, they were positioned so as to be complicit in the construction of a ghostly edifice, a scented spectacle that reanimated the traditional cultures of the indigenous peoples of the place we now call Canada. Now, while they were arranged in this circle, a sharing circle, there was also a verbal dimension in that they shared storytelling, the performing artists shared storytelling, song, and various indigenous teachings and language. So it was truly a multi-sensory engagement and an integration of multiple senses in, I think, or what we can think of as the great work of reconciliation. Indeed, there was a royal commission some years ago in Canada that stressed the importance of sort of the reconciliation between the dominant society and the indigenous peoples of Canada. And this artwork, through the medium of scent, sound, of light, and of proprioception, was seeking to bridge the chasm between the dominant society and indigenous peoples, and in that way, bring about a kind of reconciliation. Again, what I think is most significant is how the members of the dominant society are positioned to create an indigenous architectural structure, and in this way bring back to life a form of architecture that is indigenous to Canada. Now, I'd be happy to talk further about this installation, or actually what Cheryl calls a community-based art activation. So not just an installation, but an activation during the question period. But let me move on now, if I may, to the second example I would look on the table. And this is the work that I did, that I created as part of a research creation sort of project that was sponsored by, or funded by, International Flavors and Fragrances in New York. Now, the objective was to create 10 new olfactory sensations using a curated selection of the 40 plus synthetic molecules that IFF has actually created since the 1960s. So that was the objective. And it provided an opportunity for the 10 perfumers from IFF to think outside the box. And that was facilitated by them being assigned to teams that consisted of a scientist, them, and also the Dutch experience design firm Polymorph. In particular, Frederik Doornik and Marcel van Brekel. So here, the scientists in question were definitely not chemists. Okay? None of us had any expertise in chemistry at all, and that was purposeful. It included linguists, such as the brilliant Asifa Majid, an anthropologist like myself, an architect, Johanni Palasma, a sound artist, and also a psychiatrist. And the idea was that we would, out of these uncommon partnerships, actually set about creating scents that would be truly novel. And I would add that the scientific advisor for this project was the great Norwegian smell artist, Sissel Tolas. And it is thanks to her that this project was conceptualized and overseen by Anita Uhenik and incorporated us into the project. So let me just describe the process that our team went through. It consisted of a perfumer from IFF by the name of Yves Cassard and Frederik and Marcel from Polymorph. So the idea was that we would create a scent, but also an installation. So it wasn't enough just to create a perfume or an art house, you could say, but rather it was also going to be exhibited to the public in a special gallery at IFF headquarters in New York through an installation that was, again, resulted from the extraordinary design firm, Polymorph. And so right off the bat, we had a conversation about what we might invent by way of a scent. And our conversation turned to the topic of the widespread yearning for spiritual or transcendent experiences in contemporary society. And we noted the importance of rituals in generating such a sense of transcendence. So given that, how might we actually cater to this yearning for spiritual or transcendent experience through smell? We therefore began thinking about, well, what kinds of examples of smells could we use? And of course, immediately we came upon the idea of the odor of sanctity. But what does the odor of sanctity, this medieval notion, consist of? And here I think we really should have called in Caro, who is the greatest sleuth I know, and I use that word sleuth in the archaic sense of one who leads with the nose. Sherlock Holmes, for example, was said to have a very acute sense of smell, and that accounted for his brilliance as a detective. Now, Caro, as some of you will know, has reconstructed the perfumes of the Futurists, among other artistic movements, and she did so from textual sources. In that regard, she practices a kind of sensory history that involves sensing between the lines, not reading between the lines, sensing between the lines. And I'm sure that she could have actually, through careful attention to the text from the Middle Ages, worked out the recipe and concocted smell for us. But I didn't have her number at the time. We didn't consult her. I regret that. We did, however, turn up some other information on our search for what the odor of sanctity might consist of. And one of those intriguing discoveries was the smell of success. And just so you know, if you go back to the origins of the smell of success, it consisted of the smell of laurel leaves. So this was what the Roman emperor would wear as a wreath around his head when he returned to Rome after some military conquest. And so, just to say that the original smell of success is laurel leaves, and you can enjoy it too. You just have to go to your local delicatessen, get some laurel leaves and make a wreath out of it and put it on your head. But again, we weren't going to be able to find what the odor was. So we looked instead to the structure. We looked therefore at the ways in which smells were used or are used in rituals, sacred rituals around the world. And a number of things that I brought to the table as an anthropologist were the observation that frequently perfumes or incense is used as a means for humans to communicate with the gods. Secondly, I noted how scent, smoke, commends itself to the religious imagination by virtue of its volatility, its ephemerality, and indeed its spirituality. Now, spirituality, it comes from spiritus, which means breath, and breath is the medium of smell. So therefore, there is a very close link between smell, scent, and spirituality. And then when I looked to how, in effect, the sense are mobilized in religious ritual. And there I came across a quote from Michel de Montaigne in his essay. He said that, in effect, what scents do is fit us for contemplation. And he said he agreed with the theory that the introduction of incense and perfume into churches, so ancient and widespread a practice among all nations and religions, was for the purpose of raising our spirits and of exciting and purifying our senses, the better to fit us for contemplation. So using smell in ritual is to fit us for contemplation. And the final point that I brought to the discussion was the observation that scents are typically used in combination with other stimuli, rarely alone. And so, you could take the example of the Roman Catholic Mass. And there, the moment of transubstantiation, which is the moment when the bread and the wine turn into the body and blood of Christ, that moment is marked by the elevation of the sacraments. So the priest holds the vessel containing the host, and also the chalice containing the wine up, so that all of the congregation can see. And there is also, and I love this word, tintinnabulation. Tintinnabulation. It refers to the tinkling of bells, a beautiful word, tintinnabulation. And then there is the sensing of the congregation with incense, the way in which the sort of functionaries, the religious celebrants will go around waving the censer, and thereby sensing the congregation. So, what this suggested to me, and this idea was shared by the other members of our team, is that the essence of the sacred lies in the union or convocation of the senses. So the essence of the sacred, the experience of transcendence, lies in the convocation of the senses. Now, what might the convocation of the senses mean? And here I introduced the example, reaching back into ancient history, of the ancient Chinese doctrine of the 5 elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And as you may know, those of you who are familiar with ancient Chinese civilization, this theory of the elements went along with a whole theory of cross-modal correspondences. So you find that each of the elements had a corresponding odor, a corresponding taste and color and musical tone, and season and direction. And so, for example, the element of water was associated with a rotten smell, a salt taste, color black, the musical tone U, and the winter season and the direction of north. And these correspondences provided a kind of script for all of the members of the emperor's court to follow. So they would have different colored clothing, they would eat different kinds of meals, they would use different perfume and process in different directions at each season of the year. And indeed, the idea was that by conforming to this cross-modal pattern, by conforming to this schema, the court itself conserved the order both of society and the cosmos, so that the microcosm was reflected in the cosmos. Now, here is an interesting idea, that affairs will proceed in an orderly manner with the proper alignment of the senses. And indeed, that idea is what animated us, what motivated us to then look to what this alignment might consist of. The idea being that the sacred is the domain of the intersensorial. It is the point where all the senses meet, and by virtue of their coming together, you evoke a sense of the interconnectedness of things, or the wholeness of the cosmos. But the question remains, and this is a thorny one, how might a sense of the sacred, interconnection, be kindled for us moderns? Is it possible to devise a technology for the sacred? And that is indeed a very vexing question. What might be a technology for the sacred? And part of the problem has to do with the fact that the 5 elements of Chinese cosmology, ancient Chinese cosmology, or the 4 elements, sometimes 5, of Greek cosmology, have been dissolved into the 118 elements of Mendeleev's periodic table of elements. So we no longer have a nice orderly 4-fold or 5-fold structure, but rather 118. And indeed, when you drill down to the atomic level, when you drill down to the elementary level of constitution of these elements, you have a world that is characterized by Alfred North Whitehead, the atomic universe of modern physics, as a dull affair, soundless, scentless, colorless, merely the hurrying of material, endlessly, meaninglessly. We live in a universe of contingency and chance. There is no order there, nor are there any colors or sounds or anything at the atomic level. So it's really quite barren. And what is more, we live in a culture of speed, a culture of velocity, as theorized by numerous contemporary scholars. And living in a culture of speed, that is not conducive to contemplation, only distraction, only distraction. And so the idea that we explored in meeting this challenge was to model the sacred by taking the motif of the 5-fold, or quintessence, as our starting point, and elaborating a system of cross-modal correspondences. Not an imitation of ancient China. We were going to do so in a thoroughly secular way, but we did so by looking for other ways in which this 5-fold model of the cosmos might be expressed. And here, the members of Polymorph, Frederick in particular, brought up the idea of the haiku. And indeed, the haiku is very interesting. It has a very strict format. It has 5 syllables to the first line, and then 7 to the second, and then 5 to the third, so that it can be pronounced in a single breath. An example of a haiku is this one, by Ryu. I scooped the moon in my dish and poured it away with the water. I scooped the moon in my dish and poured it away with the water. And indeed, as Frederick remarked, in the case of a haiku, time is frozen, abolished in a way. So the moment of observation is captured by the haiku becomes timeless. So here was a wonderful way, by resorting to the form of the haiku, of suspending time, of stopping all the hurrying about endlessly, meaninglessly of the universe. Furthermore, Frederick observed that haiku isolates and concentrates meaningful moments. In the abundant flow of images and information nowadays, an image quickly loses its significance. Creating space, therefore, for short, intense, and precisely composed images is an ever-growing requirement. And so the idea was that they would flesh out the haiku, a verbal structure, as a visual structure. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Meanwhile, we turned the task over to Eve to compose a master set, or engine as it's known, in accordance with the numerological principles we had agreed upon. And so he used 5 iconic IFF synthetic molecules to do so, while adding in a number of other natural odor molecules as well. And meanwhile, Polymorph experimented with different ways to convert the haiku word picture into a moving image. So this was both a concession to the cinematic, the kinetic age in which we live, but also an attempt to subvert it. And so they settled on 3 video clips, one of the moon reflected in a dish of water, which echoed the haiku ryu, one of firecrackers exploding in snow, and a third of a teenage girl with braces in her teeth eating cotton candy. Now, these seem like quite random images, but they in turn were associated with the 3 declensions of the master scent that Eve created, which we called moon haiku, fire haiku, and girl haiku. And I should say that the first was distinguished by a whiff of galbanum, the second by a smoky note of that mysterious Middle Eastern fragrance known as oud, and the third by a hint of ginger, which was in order to connote both the innocence and the sensual awakening of the teenage girl. So we had our scents, and we also had our video clips, and now the question was how to combine them. And there were many logistical challenges to this, but what the Polymorph came up with was this. In the small room that was dedicated to our installation of the perfume that we called Sacred Now, and there were 10 other rooms to this installation. 3 pillars were set up, and atop each pillar was a cube that was a projection cube, and that was spinning. And so if you approach the cube at the right spot, then you could see the image. Otherwise, it was either too fast or too slow. So if you were at the right spot, you could see the image of the moon, or of the girl, or of the firecrackers. But if you were too close or too far away, it wouldn't be at a speed where the image would be. You have these spinning cubes across each of the pedestals. Also, when you arrived at that sweet spot, there was a soundtrack that would kick in, and also a scent dispenser, which would emit one of the 3 fragrances. And so what we had accomplished, I like to think, was an alignment of the senses of smell, of sound, and of sight that froze time for a moment and created a space for contemplation of the interconnection of the senses, and therefore, arguably, the sacred. Now, in the words of the catalog for the exhibition, they didn't go quite as far as I did. They said, only at a specific position in space will the viewer be able to witness the alignment of sound, scent, and sight. And in that moment, perfumery finds its higher purpose, connecting with the preciousness of the ephemeral. So the preciousness of the ephemeral is not exactly the sacred, but this idea of the sacred now was what we were seeking to put forward. And so I have a sample of moon haiku right here, and what I'm going to do is just plug it into this port in my computer, and there. Can you smell it? No. Okay? See, the audio channel and the visual channel are working just fine, but there's no smell channel on this computer. Now, why is that? What kind of sensory deprivation is actually being brought on by the medium in which we are forced to live now, which is these Zoom conferences? And in that regard, it causes me to pause and to think about how digitization, which is the medium through which we live now, and also the onslaught of the novel coronavirus, which significantly cancels the senses of taste and smell, has resulted in a virtualization of life itself. That is, both a dematerialization in that we appear to each other only in the form of these screens, which completely subverts the whole purpose of either of the installations I've been talking about, which are sense-based and not screen-based. And also, we have to practice what is called, in my homeland, in Quebec, la distanciation sociale. And so we are distant from each other socially. This only, I think, it brings to the fore how indeed, what we need to do is strive by following the measures that our governments have put in place to arrive at a time when we can restore the senses of smell and taste and de-virtualize life, live life through all our senses rather than the restricted sensorium of the screen. So thank you for your attention. I've tried to keep myself to the 30 minutes and hopefully allowed for time for your questions, which I welcome very much. And thanks again to Barbara and the other members of the organizing panel for making this moment possible, where we actually contemplate the theatricality of smell and therefore resist the visualization of traditional theater from the Greek model and move more in the direction of the Indian model, where you would go to a performance to savor certain emotions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, David. I hope you heard applause from this small audience here. We definitely have 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I will just give a microphone.
Hello, David. It's Barbara.
Hello, Barbara.
Nice to see you. I have, thank you for joining this symposium very much. I have a question which is opening me a lot of thinking. Actually, your book, The Cultural History of Smell, has inside one chapter in which it says that in ancient times, Romans and Greeks, there was no important event at all without using smell, because they used smell. Also, they were walking in among the public to spread the smell, because they wanted to the public to immerse into event and to feel it completely, because the distance was big with these big events, and there were really a lot of people. So, hello, sorry, I forgot. I have to look. I was looking at you instead of into the camera. So I would like if you would say some words about this importance of smells in ancient times. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Barbara, very much for your question. And indeed, there are many examples of this phenomenon. The ride of the Roman emperor into Rome following a victorious campaign. Not only would he wear that wreath of laurel leaves, which the smell of success, but the road would be strewn with rose petals, a foot deep. There was an extraordinary abundance, and this was, to inculcate in the general populace, the idea both of the opulence and of the munificence of their leader. So it was very much public events were multi-sensorial events. Not only was there the visual spectacle and the sonic spectacle of the corps of musicians who would be performing, but also scent was an integral component. And indeed, the Greeks, we know that they had different perfumes for different parts of the body. So the armpits, the genitals, and so forth. And in that regard, the idea was that you had a kind of wardrobe of scents. So it wasn't just that you had various clothes, but also a whole array of scents that you wore. And that cultivation of the sense of smell was widespread in the ancient world. And indeed lasts, and you might see it as still present in today's world. But today's world is more sort of preoccupied with deodorization than odorization. And indeed, instead of a strong smell or a powerful aroma being attached with the leaders of society, you now find that power is odorless. If you go to any of the big commercial towers, or if you go to the Houses of Parliament, there is no smell. That idea or that link between smell and power is gone. And indeed, if you smell, then you're probably on the lower end of the social hierarchy. So in that regard, there is the regime of an inodorate rationality that is the opposite of what we find in the ancient world, but also what we find in some other cultures. As I mentioned, the way in which Cheryl Lirondelle, with her wonderful installation, Yakaslan Mikiwa, sought to engage smell as well as light, sound, and proprioception in her composition. So thank you.
Any question among the audience? Here? I will check later online. Perhaps I have one question for you, David. Actually, two of them. The first one is relationship of spirit and spirituality with sense of smelling, with sense. I'm not sure if it is more widely or is it typical European. We have a kind of equality between spirit and smell.
I think that this is a fascinating question for sort of a kind of archaeology of the senses, and indeed that link is very strong and is given in the word spiritus, which means breath as well as soul, spirit itself. And what I think it points to is an understanding of the essential quality and essential oils, essential qualities. These are very suggestive words which are pointing to this notion of an essence that is so well conveyed by smell as really going to the root of things. And indeed, in medieval times, it was thought that holy men could sniff out sins. And indeed, there are a number of saints who were very famous for this. They could sniff out sins, and those were the sins of the flesh. So they had very acute noses, not only for the odor of sanctity, but also for the smells of sin. Now, this idea of sort of olfactory diagnosis, this idea of different sort of moral qualities or moral and immoral behavior having different smell is a very pervasive one, and one that is still reflected in such expressions as I smell a rat or so forth. So smell lingers on the margins of our knowledge, but mainly we think of knowledge as being cast in visual form. And that, hypervisuality of contemporary society is in contrast to medieval times, for example, when the important thing about smell as the spiritual sense was that it could discern things that visual appearance masked. Okay? So the idea was that sight was a surface sense. It could only give you surfaces, whereas with smell, you could penetrate to the inner core of another being and thereby determine their moral character, their ethical behavior, their sanctity or lack thereof. So one last moment. So when did this idea of smell as the spiritual sense get lost? And I think you have to lay the blame on Darwin and Freud especially. Freud had this idea that when man assumed an upright posture, there was a corresponding diminution of olfaction, and hyperacute powers of smell are only found in, quote, primitive peoples and in psychopaths. And so, smell was demoted from being the spiritual sense to being the animal sense. And it has never recovered. Still, smell has this sort of moral opprobrium attached to it. Just ask you, sort of, what is the greatest novel of the 20th century that has smell or perfume as its central theme? And that novel is, of course, Patrick Süskind's book, Perfume, The Story of a Murderer. And in that book, Grenouille, who has a hyperacute sense of smell, is an utter psychopath. Okay? So if you're too invested in smell, you become, in the eyes of the dominant society, a psychopath. And Grenouille, as you may recall, goes around capturing virgins to extract their smell, and he kills them in the process. So, the greatest novel about smell of the 20th century, following the devaluation, the animalization, the primitivization of smell by Darwin and Freud, is Perfume by Patrick Süskind. We've got to do something about that. Somebody has got to write a novel that puts smell in a positive light, and might bump that book Perfume off the shelf. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I think that this is the way in which, really we need to delve into the history of smell. Fascinating area that Caro, has actually, made alive for us through reconstructing the sense of the past, especially of these different art movements. And you have to resist the way in which smell is theorized or thought about in contemporary psychology and neuroscience. Their smell is good for detecting whether food is good or off. It's good for mate selection, and it's good for detecting a fire, for detecting danger. What a limited number of uses psychologists think we have for smell. It's appalling. It's totally impoverished. And when we look to history and we look at the kinds of cases that I've mentioned, we see just how rich potentially the sense of smell is in terms of its meanings, in terms of its uses. And that's why writing that book, Aroma, The Cultural History of Smell, together with Constance, who is a cultural historian, and Anthony Sinnott, who is a sociologist, was such an interesting endeavor. We brought out the anthropology, history, and sociology of smell. And by so doing, we liberated smell from the grip of the psychologists. And I think that more of us have to strive for that liberation of nose from psychology and those psychology labs.
For this very long answer, but it was worth. Actually, you almost answered to the second part of my question, which was the future of smell and sense. Since you're involved in creation of sense, I'm wondering, how do you see a future of this scent or perfume industry in advance? So this practical use of anthropology, how do you see it?
That is an excellent question and a very difficult one. And in that regard, thank you for actually asking a question that exposes my ignorance. I haven't looked at the future of scent. I've looked at the past, the history of smell, and I've looked at the anthropology of smell, so how smell is elaborated in other cultures. But I haven't devoted much thought to its future. But I will say this. One is that was a one-off scent. Sacred Now is a one-off scent. It was an experiment that IFF funded because they wanted their perfumers to have an opportunity to think outside the box. And it was a wonderful exercise, very fulfilling, for all of us. But Sacred Now has no commercial value. You're not going to see it at the perfume counters of any department time anytime soon or ever. It was really an art house scent, an experiment. And in that regard, I think it was a brilliant experiment. And I think this idea of designing for multiple senses at the heart of that experiment is a very powerful one and deserves to go forward. So, as an example, the project that I direct right now that you mentioned earlier, which is called Explorations in Sensory Design, is looking at the multiple sensory dimensions of diverse public spaces, like, for example, the hospital, the museum, the urban park, the spa, and so forth, from a multisensory angle. So how can the experience of those places be enriched through engaging multiple senses? For example, hospitals. Hospitals were formerly designed for efficiency, but now they are more designed for well-being. And it's recognized that, patients with an exposure to the light of the sun, heal faster. If they could do something about all those annoying beeps in the hospital, maybe people would get well sooner. So how could they curate a soundscape for the hospital? There is also the idea of the hospital smell, which strikes fear into many of us. What is that smell? How can we analyze it? How can we provide antidotes for it? Would be a relevant question. And finally, there is hospital food. And we all know that, hospital food is some of the worst tasting food in the world. Well, what should be done in order to, create healing tastes as well? Finally, people in hospital have to wear those green or pale blue smocks, and the color scheme is not very enticing. So in that regard, either the glare of the artificial lights or the bland costumes, how could that be offset by adjusting the colors, but also integrating the other senses? How might that create spaces for healing? And I think that healing sense, this idea of smells as lively and as potentially therapeutic, is a very important one. Aromatherapy is an example of that, and I think it could be developed a lot further than it has been. But aromatherapy could well be the way of the future. The first thing, in order for there to be any future for smell at all, is that there has to be some other port on our computer so that we can plug in a scent and communicate it. Okay? So the first barrier to the future of smell is that it has to actually become part of our virtual world. And there was, of course, a company called DigiSense, which failed after not very long, which tried to do just that, but tried to create these devices so that I could communicate the smell of this scent to you. but it failed. There just wasn't the interest. So we continue to lead these impoverished lives, which exist only in sight and sound, and smell is threatened with a kind of atrophy, not atrophy, but atrophy is what I'm trying to think of. So, great question, and it's a precarious future, but I think that, above all, to me, it's significant that the novel coronavirus cancels taste and smell and deprives us of our humanity. And so, we need to strive to restore that humanity by restoring, a full-fledged sensorium, and that can only come the result of the processes that are necessary for the moment in order to defeat this scourge.
Thank you very much for, again, one very substantial answer. And I have, of course, I hope you will be able to join us tomorrow morning, your time, afternoon, our time, which means at 4 p.m. exactly at the same time as now. For the final discussion, we will have 1 hour, and I hope we will be able to synthesize what will be presented up to then. And I noticed that there is a chance for those who are watching the symposium online at YouTube channel. There is a possibility to chat and to put questions online. At the first presentation it actually happened, but we didn't notice on time. So thank you very much, and hopefully you will stay with us further.
I will, and I look forward very much to tomorrow's session, and thank you very much for your questions today.
Thank you very much, Raiko, also for leading this discussion, and thank you very much to our speaker. And I would like to invite now Raiko to give us his speech, which is entitled "Between Aesthesis and Cholera: Performing the Everyday and Improvising Culture." Maybe I should introduce Raiko for those of you who are not very well acquainted with his work, although there is not a lot of them of you here present, but maybe to the people which are watching us online. Raiko is a professor of ethnology, cultural anthropology at University of Ljubljana, Faculty of Arts, Department of Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology. His research focuses on anthropology of popular music, theories of culture, urban anthropology, methodology of anthropological research, and a lot, I think, of other researches, among them also the research of the sensorial and the smell. He's author of a couple of music-related monographs and participates as expert researcher in various projects. One of them is ERC project Sensotra, and maybe less known is that he's also a musician and performer, a very interesting one, which I add as my small contribution to getting you known even in less certain parts. So please I invite you to give us some of your very interesting thoughts.
Thank you very much. I don't have to introduce my double, let's say, affiliation in this case, because what I will present is related actually to ongoing study which is approaching to its end actually with University of Eastern Finland. But I will try somehow to relate a couple of issues I find extremely important for me personally as a teacher of methodology at the studies of ethnology and cultural anthropology, and at the same time as a human being trying to understand other human beings, which is essentially what ethnographers do in many different ways and in many different scales. So I will just go through a couple of concepts which will bring us into something we understand as human reality and human culture. And then I will try to show the path of understanding of human beings, and then I will show you a couple of examples from our fieldwork, which is based on sensobiographic walks. I will explain them later. In terms of understanding of particular senses and sensation, which is essential part of ethnography and our daily life at the same time. And I will try to bring some conclusions at the end in the continuum of various senses in terms of individual experience and social sharing, let's say that way. One of quite peculiar issues related to sensoria in general is that we actually somehow forgot, if we are not philosophers, actually, that the very term aesthetics is derived from sensual perception. The term aesthetics was needed in one specific historical time. It was 18th century, when art itself became an issue of specific philosophical rethinking, although of course aesthetic theory was with philosophers since the beginning of ancient Greek philosophy and other philosophies. But the very term aesthetics is very new, and it is related to our perception of space and time, but mostly space. It has its spatial roots in a way. So this is just the description of it from Wiktionary, which is sometimes essentially good source, sometimes, well, not so much, but in this case it is just perfect. So perception comes to you from using of senses related to feelings, hearing, seeing. It is perception by the intellect as well as the senses. So this double integration of intellect and sensuality in bodily terms is already embedded in Ai's thesis. And then, of course, that which is perceived as assent and ability of perception, ability to perceive, discernment. So it is cognition and discernment of moral discernment in ethical matters, which means we have additional let's say, meaning of this very complex word of sensation, which is ethical. Building of morality itself is embedded into practices we understand as aesthetic practices. Then we have culture, a term we use constantly, and it is one of the basic concepts, of course, of cultural, so-called, this part of anthropology in the United States related to understanding of human culture. We use it without knowing that it is a highly, highly complex word. Actually, one of the most complicated concepts we use in English vocabulary and, of course, in any other vocabulary we use. It is derived from Latin verb colere, which means to inhabit, to cultivate, to protect, and to honor with worship. So we have many layers of its meaning, but the most important is active layer, that means to cultivate and to inhabit. And we still use this complex understanding. So why I'm starting with these two concepts? We live in specific place and specific time. We are creatures that somehow create spatial environment we live in, and we definitely create it as human beings and as a humanity, whole history which is artificial reality. We are somehow either slaves or masters of, and all we can imagine in between. History is a human environment, essential human environment. And this is the reason why I have to start in this more general way. And of course we heard David Hose not so long ago, but he is definitely one of the most important scholars, opened a way somehow path into understanding of sensoria in anthropology. He was not the only one, of course, but his work was extremely important. He was speaking about revolution in social sciences related to sensoria, or to, let's say, sensory studies. It is not just another turn. We have many different turns in social sciences and humanities in the past couple of decades, but sensorial itself became so much important and so much different frame to entering something I will try to describe later in my presentation as to understand and to describe contingency of everyday life, contingency of our very existence, that sensation itself is the most fundamental domain of cultural expression, the medium through which all the values and practices of society are enacted. So it is very basic, and we have to understand its basic nature and variety of ways of sensing around the world. Of course, we do not have one way of sensing. We have as many ways as a human society is able to produce communities of sense. And it is very important to understand. For me, starting with this, not only concepts, but somehow understanding of a situation in which we are somehow to bring inside out is, of course, experience itself as a practice we do as anthropologists. In introductory classes of ethnography, I always use this quote, and I still think it is extremely important to understand that participant observation, which is the most basic way of acquiring knowledge in anthropology, is essentially based on a kind of a miracle. You as a researcher, I mean, in your bodily existence, become the instrument for both data collection and analysis through your own experience. This is how we acquire knowledge in anthropology. So what is actually this experience? Is this experience just a performance, or is it a very specific kind of performance we do? And this question mark will remain at least until the final part of my presentation. It's just a hint for now. When I mentioned some other anthropologists who came, of course, to the same conclusion, it was Paul Stoller already in the 80s when he became actually, how to say it, a magician while doing field work. He became a part of masters of not exactly magic, but practices in obsession cults in Niger. So if anthropologists are to produce knowledge, how can they ignore how their own sensorial biases affect the information they produce? So how is it possible, simply not to mention the way how we sense, the way how we experience when we write about ways of life of people? And one of the reasons might be that we are, as a Western civilization and Western, let's say, humanities and social sciences derived from Western philosophy, of course, not exactly somebody who inherited, but somebody who is more following the path without knowing. So we are actually children of Western thought. But before I will show this essentially visual way of forming our culture, and then textual itself, I will just show you briefly how we do this kind of fieldwork I was mentioning. The project itself, I still don't remember its full title, I have to say, although it is approaching its end after 4 years. It's called Sensory Transformation and Transgenerational Environment Relationship in Europe, and as I mentioned before, the chief researcher is Helmi Järvelvuoma, who will present her paper tomorrow. And I think she is with us already. At University of Eastern Finland. So we simply use the experiential approach to knowledge and to people's testimonies simply by walking and talking. But it is not, of course, unstructured walking and talking. We have an older participant in the walk and a younger one, and they are supposed to communicate, and you have researchers together who make audio and visual recordings of the walk, and we have some self-recordings as well, devices put in, and we are trying to somehow engage senses during the walk to attract biographical testimonies. And we collected many biographical testimonies, and Helmi will explain much more about it tomorrow, but this is the very first walk in Ljubljana. We did in 2017 in the autumn, approximately the same time as now, the late October, I think it was. Somehow the scenery of those walks may be very different. So I will show you the second one, which was, I think, one of the more initial walks in late November, again 2017. It was not during the night. It was, of course, at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was about time when we will perform sensory walk today. But still, the scenery looks completely different. But it is the same. Ljubljana, well, I didn't mention there were 3 cities involved in this project, Ljubljana, Turku, and Brighton, but I will use only Ljubljana material for this presentation because I'm struggling with analysis of it at the moment. So what is actually this human life we are trying to cope with and understand? I will try to put some grounding, some grounds of this. Human life itself is more or less a constant or continuous improvisation, and we take sonic reality, that means sounds we live with or within, as something given. There are other senses that somehow appear to challenge us and our perception more, but it is just seemingly. So somehow if we go through everyday life, Henri Lefebvre, one of the most exciting scholars of everyday life in the previous century, would somehow define everyday life of that it is what is left over after all distinct, superior, specialized, structured activities have been singled out by analysis. So everything else, sociologists would usually study and understand the social reality is left aside, and we have basic everyday life. This is after Benheimer quotation. And when I was speaking about sonic environment, we take sonic environment as given, but it is not necessarily something alien to us, but somehow incorporated in our life. So ethnomusicologist and anthropologist Steven Feld started his research of Kaluli people in Papua New Guinea in the 70s, I guess, at the beginning of the 70s. And he would somehow brought one very important concept, local domestic concept by people in Bosavi region of Papua New Guinea. Lift up over sounding is the translation of Dulugo Ganalan as a term for what is going on in sonic reality, that means with sounds. It is spatial at the same time, so something that is lift up and over, and temporal. Sounding, that means sounds that are lasting in time. So these are experiences people create and use as existing experience in a whole, how to say it, integral experience of social and, of course, environmental reality. So this lift up over sounding is a spatial, acoustic metaphor, a visual image set in sonic form, and a sonic form set in visual imagery. Well, if people around the world would use sonic means to create, how to say it, inhabitable space I hope you remember these two inhabit as essential part of understanding culture. That means to cultivate reality by sound. Then sight is the second sense we have to consider. But before I come to this, I will just bring you a very short, a bit longer excerpt from our field work, just to show you that I was surprised. Someone who is studying music and music-related activities or sonic activities of humanity, I'm still quite sure, especially now in Corona times, that music is not only for me, but for many people, perhaps the most important thing in life. However, all walkers who were talking spontaneously, just by walking on a path they would choose, they didn't mention music and dance so easily, although it is an extremely important part of everybody's life. Usually it was induced by questions of researchers or by interaction with researchers, so this is a rather typical example. So when you come to Metelkova, a researcher would talk to one of the younger walkers whom they knew from before, but she was a musician, a violin player, part-time, let's say. So why did you come to Metelkova? Simply because we had rehearsals, but together with these rehearsals, we would socialize, having beer and having just talking to each other. Okay, fine. But she would say that she would never experience something like that. Let's go to the concert, maybe somewhere else afterwards. Grab a beer or something. Would say yes. Now the question would come: which were your top 3 concerts? I will just mention the first one. Well, the first one was definitely Kulturshock at the Gala Hala. For those who doesn't know the band, it is a band playing a kind of post-Yugo rock music stationed in the United States and extremely popular in Bosnia and Herzegovina and other republics of former Yugoslavia. And great musicians, actually, great band. So this was some concert. Yeah, again, it was really, really marvelous. So we went out from that occasion at 4 in the morning, and then she would have an exam and so on and so forth. But another good concert. Well, I have to say something, as the other researcher would say, so this is the way how we have a dialogue during ethnography, is simply, well, culture shock is, Kulturshock is just a band which is, when you met them for the first time, totally awesome, I would say. But when you meet them 2 or 3 times, well, it starts repeating. So music itself is so self-understandable that there is simply no need to speak about it anymore than when you are directly confronted. So I will see if I will find many other occasions or situations in which the walkers themselves would induce memories of music, sounds, concerts, and these kind of events. I guess there will be at least some of them. Why? So we take sonic environment as given, just something normal, something that is simply not so much important. But sight itself is very much different. So let us read one very, very old and extremely important part of history of knowledge, of European knowledge. All men naturally desire knowledge. An indication of this is our esteem for the senses. For a part of their use, we esteem them for their own sake, and the most of all, the sense of sight, and so on and so forth. It is the beginning of metaphysics by Aristotle. So animals are by nature born with the power of sensation, but they are different. Some of them would acquire the faculty of memory, whereas others do not. Faculty of memory in human beings is definitely related to ability of speaking. That means speech. And this is what philosophy is about. However, if you experience something completely different than you are expecting, then it may happen that breathing air, sense in air would become more important. So the traveler approaching the new world is first conscious of it as a scent, very different from the one suggested back in Paris by the connotations of the word Brazil, and difficult to describe to anyone who has not experienced it. They were like a forest breeze alternating with hothouse scents, the quintessence of the vegetable kingdom, and held a peculiar freshness of so concentrated as to be transmuted into a kind of olfactory intoxication. Olfactory intoxication. The last note of a powerful chord sounded separately as if to isolate and fuse the successive intervals of diversely fruity fragrances. So this is Claude Lévi-Strauss, his famous first, well, not first, but most successful and well-sold book, Tris Tropiques, from the 50s. So smell would come out if you completely change your environment. I see I will have to speed up because I still have some things to say. So we have, in a way, sight, which is definitely collective and much more related to common socialness. Sound, which is deeply embedded in cultivation of spatial and temporal dimensions of human life. But what happens when we come to a more individual way? Is it proprioception, maybe the sense which is the most unique and the most individualized? Proprioception itself is a sense of our very body. But is it social as well? Of course it is, but in much less degree than sight itself. So what is about, and the scent is, the ability to smell is in between. So this is another example from our field work and walks. It is about scent. You asked me why I remember this scent. It was related to that aunt. My aunt Anna was, I met her too, the younger walker would say. The older one was speaking. She was very beautiful and she has always smelled so nice. And that is what I remember. No matter what I went through, the scent stayed with me. And it still stays. I still feel her, even today. Could you please describe how you feel her? What was the beauty of her smell, of this smell? Actually, yes. As a matter of fact, I don't know the beauty, but I know it was. It was unintrusive, mild, related to a kind of calm, restful life. It was related to, I don't know, serenity. It was a very, very soothing scent. So the speaking of scent is very difficult because we don't have vocabulary. However, when we speak about scent, we always individualize experience of the very smell. And it is deeply somehow remembered by human body. And it is very much individualized, much more than sight. So this is another sense we were somehow approaching during these walks. It's tactility, tactile sense of touch. So this is just a scenery from one of our walks, and suddenly the walker, the older walker who is a sculptor, would touch those leaves and some other leaves of some other trees. I didn't make all these pictures of it, but just to have a kind of an impression of it. Tactility itself used to be the way of touching reality. Touch, the sense of touch would always somehow bring people to reality. And this is the final point I will try to make. So, I noticed you touched this willow. Weeping willow, yes. I have good memories of weeping willow, indeed. Well, they seem similar to me, and it is such a beautiful tree. So, why did you do it? Well, it stood at my path. It was in range of my arm. Why shouldn't I have cursed it? Oh, of course. Yes, interesting, clearly. It is related to my profession as sculptor, that I like to touch things. I have to touch them. Sculpturing is an art of touching. Otherwise, weeping willow is actually such a lyrical tree, isn't it? the most lyrical tree of them all. So, now we came to the end of my presentation. Human body in experiencing reality itself. How is it coping with reality? Well, our body itself, Oliver Sacks, a neurologist, a famous neurologist, would write, is formed from the coordination of senses, not just touch and vision, but proprioception and perhaps vestibular sensation too. All senses we have are somehow coordinated in our body and reality. And my main point of this presentation is that I find improvisation of daily life and a kind of working in this most trivial, most grounded experience, the joint reality of ethnographic experience and experience of daily life. I will not read this Vincent Carpenzano's long part on the scene, but it is important to understand that somehow I have to come to the end of to the conclusions of my paper. That this improvisation in daily life is basically the shared reality of all possible participants, including researchers themselves. If ethnography ever touches reality, it is in improvisation in everyday life, shared, collective, and peculiar individual improvisation. That means it is a kind of perhaps a new collective sense. Ethnography as a kind of a new collective sense, coping with such phenomena as social drama or Deleuzian assemblage or agencement, as it is called in French. That means contingent, in a way, arbitrary issues of everyday life that relates us as human beings on the very basic level. And this is always sensorial. That means aesthetic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajko, for this inspiring presentation, which basically linked a lot to what, not only what David was saying, but also to what Enrique Vargas was speaking about in his approaches to sensory theater. Are there any questions for Rajko at the moment? Maybe I could.
Too comprehensive.
Sorry?
It was too comprehensive.
It was very inspiring, but so maybe the audience was without words. But I would have a question. In the beginning we were listening to Enrique Vargas and his concept of theater of sensorial theater. And in which way do you think that anthropology can explore the sensorial in the everyday life and to link it to what Enrique does in his performances? This would be a basic question. I'm interested in what you're thinking about.
Yeah, I had the same question before listening to his presentation, because he was mentioning not exactly consciousness, but becoming conscious. Mm-hmm. So that means you have to open your body for sensations, to open to reality and to open to other people. Mm-hmm. So in anthropology, ethnography itself and ethnographic experience is basically very close to this. It is not performance. It is not, of course, it is never something that is anyhow designed in advance. You have to improvise when you're doing ethnography a lot, but you have a kind of design of your own research. So you have some theatrical a kind of theatrical experiences, but it is not theater at the same time. So there is a kind of an interchanging of possibilities in understanding the reality of this paramount reality. This is Schützian term I didn't mention before. And on the other side, the scene. That means something put on the stage to be, well, experienced or observed or both at the same time. And it is a kind of turnaround situation we have in theater. You have dramaturgy, you have scenery, and you have performance. Here you have a kind of everything but not planned in advance. So that means in improvisation we come together. And I think it is not a kind of surprise that many anthropologists would would operate quite well in improvised theater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that this is another question I wanted to ask you is when doing the work, for example, the sensory walks through the cities. You basically the anthropologist who leads this, or maybe it could be also two persons doing it, as you're doing it in your project. You suddenly become you take the function of an actor. How do you feel about this scientist taking the role of an actor and getting back to the scientific research?
Yeah, this is actually a kind of a tricky situation of these people doing field work. You are at the same time a human being, a private person, and an actor of, or let's say performer of ethnography, an ethnographer. So people you are working with always see you as ethnographer, not just as an ordinary human being. If you can put those two roles together into one, then you do not perform anymore. But otherwise you have a very similar experience, I guess, as actors in theater. You are at the same time an actor and at the same time a character you play.
Thank you very much. This is very interesting, and we could explore this further on. Maybe I would just ask if there are any questions. Otherwise, we have to proceed, and I think we will return tomorrow at the final discussion to the topics, to the very interesting topics of relation between science and art, theater and anthropology, theater and sensorial theater and theater sciences, and so on and so on. The things, basically the topics we want to, because of those topics, we decided to do this symposium in a way.
And I certainly hope we will be able tomorrow to include all people online into the discussion, because at the moment I can't see the way how we can do it. So we will find a solution for it.
We were thinking, and we'll try to resolve those technical problems for tomorrow to enable people to join us through the Zoom.
For us to see it.
And for us to see it, I think we'll do it. We can prepare it for tomorrow. Today, we just see the cameras, so and we do not see this. So, are there any more questions? Otherwise, thank you once more, Raiko.
So thank you very much. It will happen that thank you. The scenery will remain basically the same, because we are switching roles in this afternoon session with Tomasz, and it is my great pleasure to announce his presentation for today. So Tomasz Toporisic, I will just briefly read this stuff. Is a dramaturg and theater theoretician, an associate professor and vice dean of the Academy of Theater at the University of Ljubljana. From 1997 to 2003, he was the artistic director, and from 2003 to 2016, a dramaturg at theater, well, famous Slovenian theater, Mladinsko gledališče, Mladinsko theater. In 1995, he co-founded Exodus Festival of Contemporary Performing Arts, and he was a curator of several exhibitions for Prague Quadriennale of Performance Design and Space, And he is an author of 4 books on contemporary performing arts. And there are, of course, some latest essays, but the most important is the presentation for today, which is very shortly entitled Performing Sensorial Liminality, and I'm quite confident that it will not be so short.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I have to take this. Thank you very much for this nice introduction. It's always good if you can take if you can make short titles. I succeed very rarely, and this time I succeeded, and I hope it will work also with the content of what I'm going to present. I will not be using the PowerPoint, although I could use it, but and I'll try to be quite short, but to get into some problems and some thematics that occupy me during the last 20 years, and which are connected firstly to the work of Enrique Vargas, then also to the work of Barbara, and also to the work of other artists working within the field of the sensorial theater as one of the most distinguished and under-researched, let us say, liminal concepts or territories of contemporary theater. I want to discuss the liminal nature of the sensorial language in contemporary performing arts. My starting point will be the following chain of thoughts defining a specific form of performers and the audience. During an artistic event, a performative action reshapes both the public and performers, along with the interchange of the roles between the stage and the auditorium, either in the sense of Augusto Bois' sense of spectator, or in the sense of the destruction of the fourth wall, a specific autopoietic feedback loop as defined by Erika Fischer-Lichte between both parties takes place. My aim will be to rethink and re-examine shortly the role of the sensorial language as one of the rarely used but highly efficient tools of the performative revolutions of the 20th and 21st century. Erika Fischer-Lichte notes in her book The Transformative Power of Performance, a New Aesthetics, when describing probably the most known performance artist Marina Abramović and her performance, erasing the boundaries between private and public through touch, smell, and other senses, which the boundary between public and private extends to everyday life. As one of the cornerstones of this new liminal theater of touch, which how we can also, and smell, we can define the performance or the happenings as this. She takes Richard Schechner's staging of Dionysus in '69 by the performance group, in which the actors touch the visitors very directly. I quote Erika Fischer-Lichte from her book. The purpose of Schechner's performance was to democratize the relationship between actors and viewers. Traditional theater focused on sight and hearing, and Schechner proposed the inclusion of smell, taste, and touch for a more intimate experience of staging. Already the famous performance Dionysus in '69, we fortunately also have a version of Brian De Palma, the film version of it, as a documentary. In the scene of caressing, he tried to abolish the boundaries between fiction or play and reality. He understood touch as something that humanizes, but this humanization and liberation failed in some viewers to equate the game with reality. So Erika Fischer-Lichte noticed that the touch of actors was understood literally as an invitation to sexual intercourse in reality, and not as a work of liberation through liberation through contact with the phenomenal body. Thus, physical contact, which was supposed to abolish the binary between reality and fiction, public and intimate, turned into its opposite during the active reception of the audience. The spectators did not act as they were supposed to act. The actors thus had to face the boundaries they were trying to destabilize and subvert. Spectators were not created in a sense of Augusto Boal, but as an intrusion of the real into theatrical fiction that was planned. In the case of Schechner, Erich Lichte points out one of the most interesting features of modern performing practices, their liminal sensuality and touch. During the last 100 years, a part of modern performing practices had consciously returned to hybridity, to the binding of different media, to the attempts which since the beginning of the 20th century, since the Futurism, and especially from the happenings of Fluxus, have tried to combine traditionally separate arts. In the words of Alan Caprow, practitioner and theoretician of contemporary performing arts, blurring of art and life, the mixed art and life. Thus, the new hybrid spaces of art were created, various forms of hybrid stage practices, among which we will focus today primarily on the theater of touch, let us say. All these performative practices re-articulate some essential postulates of the American theatrical avant-garde of the 1960s, the neo-avant-garde performance and visual art in general, like Marina Abramović, Viennese Actionist, and the others. This interdisciplinary approach, which abolishes the binary opposition between actor and spectator, view, touch, textual, physical, semiotic, and physical, emerges primarily at the crossroads between media such as theater, music, dance, painting, photography, video, sculpture, and architecture. In the new millennium, we are witnessing a continuation of what the theorist of visual theater Bonnie Maranka wrote in her book Theater of Images. I quote her: "The convergence of theater and visual arts in a new understanding of performance, demonstrating why these two stories must be interconnected in a comprehensive view of the 20th century. If let there ever be a coherent history of thoughts about the performance and theater. At the same time, it seems that contemporary art in some places abolishes a fundamental relationship of opposition between theater and sensuality. The theater thus stimulates the desire to touch. The sensory forms of theater can therefore also be understood in terms of the liminal acts as defined by Susan Broadhurst in her book Liminal Acts. That is, we interpret it as a part of contemporary performing arts, which is essentially hybrid, interdisciplinary. Broadhurst explains this art with a term derived from definition of anthropologist Victor Turner: fractal chaos, a fertile nothingness, a storehouse of possibility. Let us recall Victor Turner in his essay Liminality and Communitas, and his argumentations. Liminal performance is thus, according to Broadhurst, which derives a lot of her thoughts from Victor Turner, emphasize the physical, the technological, and the chthonic. Their aesthetic characteristics, however, are hybridization, indeterminacy, lack of aura, and this disintegration of the hierarchical distinction between high and popular culture. According to her, the quasi-generic features of this art are also experimentation, innovation, marginality, etc. But what we will be interested was a part of this liminal territory of theater, which could be defined as sensorial theater. Sensorial theater can therefore, as Barbara Pijanić defines it in her MA thesis, is something which differs from classical theater. I will quote you now some thoughts from your thesis. You write, classical theater and performing arts in general communicate visually and audiovisually, and sensory language tends to include, in addition to sight, communication with the visitor on the other sensory levels. Visual communication with the help of images has a similar role in the sensorium and audio communication with a word. As such, sensory theater could be interpreted as a successor and consequence of the connection between the liminal and the hybrid, as known in the history of the Slovene theater and performing arts, within the so-called performative turn and the neo-avant-garde practices, especially the neo-avant-garde groups Oho and Pupilja Ferkewerk. And a specific example of this tradition, we can take also the sensory theater of Barbara Pijanic, which was created as a continuation of a method of a magician in this theater, Colombian director Enrique Vargas, and his Teatro de los Sentidos. Part of contemporary art thus strives for a liminal experience for spectators and performers, which should cause change in their perception of reality, themselves and others in performances and events. It counts on triggering a change in the viewer's perception of reality and on the simultaneous emergence and exposure of the gap between signifiers and signified. At the same time, it produces what Philip Ausländer understands as politics of performance, revealing the process of cultural control. He radically appropriates various forms of staging, ways of addressing the audience, and thus builds his politics of performance. Let us look now for the conclusion of our paper, two more examples of sensory theater, of touch and other senses. Firstly, Enrique Vargas and his performance, and secondly, the group Onkraj and their performance, The Smile Off Your Face. In an interview with the Australian newspaper, Sydney Morning Herald, Enrique Vargas defines the importance, aesthetic, revolutionary, and liminality of the Teatro de los Sentidos as follows, I quote him: "Tyranny of the eye. The eye can be imperialistic. It becomes so arrogant that it makes it impossible for us to sense other things. We want to use the whole body, not to forget about the eye, but to come to the story using all five senses. The imagination is a very important power we have, which is a lot of times reduced by words. Anyway, the point of the labyrinth is that it is a game, as he told us today, and today contemporary art a lot of times forgets about this playfulness of art and life." And I continue with quotation of Enrique, and the most important thing is the mystery behind it. The game doesn't so much give us information as shine a light on experience, he says. You become the protagonist of your own story. You will meet certain situations, be touched by actors emerging from the darkness, but these encounters become springboards for your own ideas and questions. I do not know what you are, so I cannot know the answers. End of quotation of Enrique Vargas. The second example, Lisbeth Groth-Nibeling, in an interesting article, Radical Intimacy, which polemicizes with the thoughts of Jacques Rancière and his famous essay, The Emancipated Spectator, highlights Onkraj's performance, The Smile Off Your Face, a sequel of Vargas' tradition of what the Netherlands call theater experience or theater of experience. In a performance, actors wheel around a blindfolded audience member, then caresses him or her on a bed. In Internal, a show which caused uproar in Edinburgh when it played there 10 years ago, an actor sits in booth with a single theater goer, seduces them into revealing their dark secrets, then shockingly makes them public in a group session at the end. Thus, they enact the transgression of public-private boundaries. My passage into the realm of the smile, as described above, immediately touches upon this ambiguity. Instead of semi-private seat in the darkened auditorium, I stand out and am seen, and yet this is a private encounter. I am a spectator, but cannot see. I am a singular spectator, yet I belong to a group of spectators. My experience probably could be archived into the Department of Confusion, but stepping out of the wheelchair serves a threshold on which their in-betweens suddenly appear. Several other in-betweens show up too on the threshold. Themes that are restricted to today's debate of spectatorship suddenly appear. And I will conclude this intervention with the connection between the various forms of bodily touch and sensory language that I mentioned and shortly outlined in today's proceedings. I can state together with the Dutch theorist, a part of the contemporary theater is no longer merely visual and audible, but also engages other senses. Thus, the researches are being made to find out and explore a new type of theatrical performance and its reception manifesting itself as a spatiality and physicality oriented perception that triggers liminal states of intimacy, understood as an amalgam of direct sensorial sensation, imagination, and reflection, as a special form of response to excessive individualism and the limited field of reception, which Enrique was talking about today. This performative art triggers special forms of sensory perception that allows at least temporarily the audience to escape from the favored passive reception of the show and to, in words of Enrique Vargas, fill the silences. Sensory theater of touch therefore strives for a liminal experience for spectators and performers, and this causes a change in their perception of reality, themselves and others, among the individual participants in the performance as an event and also in everyday life. So this would be it. Thank you.
So it's time for final couple of questions for Tomasz. So we will again have to share this dialogue at the end. I was wondering, when you mentioned playfulness as part of, let's say, derivation from liminality, further, what is, at your opinion, relationship of sensorial theater and entertainment? Is there any relationship at all?
I mean, we could also call it an entertainment, but this would mean that we in a way redefine the entertainment. I think that the term of entertainment in the beginning of the century, with Dadaism, for example, in Cabaret Voltaire, was much broader than it is today. We take entertainment today as, especially in Slovenia, maybe it's in Anglo-Saxon world it's a bit different. They have a broader scope of in interpreting the entertainment. We think that entertainment is something which is does not involve the Jacques Rancière's term of emancipated spectator. I think that the entertainment is this is also something which I think Enrique was talking about. The art is not just about suffering; it's also about the playfulness, and through playfulness we can get to some new insights into our own personalities and the life around us.
Yeah, this is related as well to the other question I wanted to pose. You mentioned liberation after you talked about performances with touch, involving touch itself. How much can we understand kind of liberation within theater itself? Is theater, how to say it, may theater become the place of liberation of any kind at all?
Yeah, this is difficult to say. I think it can in certain ways, but it's difficult to say that it can become in the way or in the sense that the living theater was thinking it can become, or the performance group was thinking they were thinking in the 60s and in the 70s. But it can become in the sense that, for example, a lot of sensory theater is exploring in the sense of liberation of our senses in this way, or in the sense about which I think Derrida writes when he writes about Artaud, in the Artaudian sense also, I think, which the theater can liberate us of logocentricity in a way. I think I do believe in this, but maybe it's naive, but I still do believe in this. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully these elements are present, at least at my opinion, with this play. I think it will be performed by Barbara Pia, Divina Commedia. At least I felt it that way, in one specific way.
Yeah, me too. So we're inviting the public who did not see it to see I think a very good example of sensory theater, which is presented within the festival.
So thank you very much. If there is any very immediate intervention from the public, we can share a microphone. Otherwise, I'm very grateful for... Do you have, Barbara? Okay. Okay. So the first afternoon of the symposium is now over. I hope you enjoyed all the presentations and got many how to say it, inspiring ideas for the future. And I invite you to meet again tomorrow. As far as I remember, it is at 11. Our time, you have to calculate your time if you are online. I can't do it for you in any way, but it will be very exciting, I promise. So thank you very much. Tehnično, samo da